Let's talk about health effects for a second. What causes allergies? Mold starts with a spore, just like a seed of a plant. So if you have, spore, a fungus A and a mold B, and this mold has one type of a mycotoxin, and this has another type, and it lands on a wet surface, this mycotoxin will stop this spore from germinating. So it's like playing chemical warfare with each other. And so that's the reason why they have these chemicals in the first place. But when you breathe them in, then you're going to have a reaction to it. The other thing is mold grows just like a bush, and you can tell the difference under a microscope, just like a tree. Different shapes, different patterns tell you what the species and genus is. But there are two chemicals within the cell walls of the mold's hypha structure. That's what this is called, hypha. One is called protease, the other is glucan. And when you breathe this in, you'll have a reaction to it. Now, not everybody reacts to this. It's based on genetics. Some people will react at 200 spores per cubic meter. Some people, it'll take 10,000. Whether you are of an older age, where your immune system is slowing down, or you're really young and your immune system is just starting to rev up. If you have a precondition, like you have asthma, or you have cancer or some other kind of health issue, and your body is working real hard against that already, and then you have a new something to deal with. The other thing is normal folk. I'm pretty normal, and so anything can affect me if it's a high enough concentration. I go into like the worst houses you can believe, where it's literally composting, and you have to wear a respirator, or just anybody would have a reaction to it. And even though all the health and safety issues that our company takes in protecting our employees, we always get hit with 1 or 2 days of a dose of something just because you go into the wrong place at the wrong time. All right. What are typical symptoms of mold exposure? It's flu-like symptoms, hay fever, respiratory distress, headaches, brain fog, fatigue. Fatigue is probably the most common one. You know, when you're sick and you wake up after a 1-hour nap, how you still feel bad. That's kind of what we're talking about. I also want to mention one other thing about yeast. Yeast is a single cell organism, but it's under the fungi umbrella. And what happens with yeast is, if you're like bedridden, if you're sleeping for 18 hours a day on the couch or in the bed, you can develop a plume of yeast, and it causes skin rashes. The moisture in your bed will cause this to occur. Also, dust mites. Dust mite, they don't bite you, and they certainly don't chew on you like a tick. But what happens is they eat your skin cells that flake off, and then they poop, and then you breathe in that poop. So if you go to bed and you have a rash, I would be thinking about yeast. If you start coughing, wheezing, and sneezing, I would be thinking about dust mites. All right. Indoor air quality assessments. Don't ask a builder to do an indoor air quality assessment. I don't know how to build houses. It's not my forte. It's not something that I have any skill at. But I followed behind so many where they're going into a home and they're making opinions about what's there and what's not there. And they're not right. They're totally incorrect. And so ask a professional who has that skill background to help you with decision making. All right. When we talk about indoor air quality assessments, I think I mentioned this already, that what we're talking about is a wide variety of things, not just mold. We could talk about formaldehyde and a lot of building materials, OSB board. You know, a lot of times when you go into new construction, you smell that wonderful smell of new construction. Actually, it's formaldehyde. We use it, I don't know why manufacturers use it, but it's really, really common in any kind of engineered building material. Sewer gas, carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide. Again, odors and asbestos and lead paint. Now the equipment that we use, I have a lot of equipment. I only brought a little bit to show you guys. The most important thing that I use when I do an assessment is a flashlight. I just walk into the house with a flashlight because I've done quite a few of them. So I would say the most important tool I'd pull out is a moisture meter. And I have a couple of different ones. I would suggest anyone in the building industry to own a moisture meter. I mean, it's just common sense to have. So this is a pen style moisture meter. It measures the electrical conductance across these two poles. And the thing to remember, and this one has different scales. It can measure gypsum board, it can measure wood or plaster. So then I've got, this is a different type of a moisture meter. This is non-penetrating. This is a non-penetrating meter. And all you do is lay it flat on the surface, and again, it has 3 different scales on it. This one has wood, timber, drywall, roofing, and plaster or brick. And sometimes you just can't put a hole in or a surface. And what this does is it sends a signal from one side and it's received by the other side. All of this equipment has to be calibrated before you use it. You just can't pull it out of a box and just start using it. Otherwise, your data will be wrong. Let's see. I didn't mean to do that. This is a temperature humidity meter. This is my favorite one. You really, in your home, especially around your laundry area, I always suggest to my clients to get a moisture or a temperature humidity gauge. You don't want to exceed 60% because that's enough humidity to allow germination growth. There's a direct relationship between the humidity in a room and the moisture content of the wood. And you don't want to exceed certain percentages. Generally, right now, what they're writing is about 21%. Once you exceed 21% in wood, that's enough for germination. And then it'll continue to grow until it dries down to about 15%. So that's why anybody in the building industry should really know about moisture content of the materials that they're using. The reason I like this one is because I can hit a button and it can tell me the dew point. Dew point is a wonderful, and we're going to talk about this quite a bit in a minute. Dew point is a wonderful temperature to know because once you hit that temperature, you get condensation. So, you know, in the morning you go outside, you see the dew on the grass. Well, that's why it's called dew point. This is a formaldehyde meter. This is a combustible gas indicator. So if you have leaking gas around your piping, you got to have this. I use this piece of equipment with my moisture meter because these are coated with Teflon and it's exposed at the tip. So you drill 2 little holes and you can slide this in and measure the moisture content inside your wall cavity. That's a really good thing to know. We don't open wall cavities unless we have to. Timeline for mold growth. When you have water, say you have a water pipe and it breaks, and you have water flowing all over the floor, you have 48 hours, 2 days, you have 48 hours before that natural occurring mold spores that are in the air will germinate. After that, 9 days after that initial germination, the colonies are going to become mature enough to produce their own spores. So 11 days after that initial water release, you'll have colonies mature enough to produce their own spores, and you'll get a logarithmic explosion contaminants in the air. When we talk about how long colonies are present, I get asked that a lot from insurance companies in particular. And it's really, really, really hard to tell how long colonies have been present. Because under a microscope, old colonies look just like new colonies. They go dormant, they desiccate just a little bit, they get a little skinnier, but once it hydrates, it looks exactly like a brand new growth. So I don't want to venture into timelines and when did things happen. That's a tough question to answer. But the important thing to remember is that once the colonies have grown, they never go away. They go dormant, but they never go away. So you can open up a wall cavity or you can look in an attic and it's been there for 20 years and it's just going to be there for another 20 years. It just goes dormant and it waits for another pulse of water so it can start growing again. Now the odors that we smell, you know, when you go into some houses and you get that moldy type smell, what that is, it's the off gas. Just like when you want to make bread, you take that yeast and you put it in water and sugar and you get that wonderful bready smell. Well, this is the exact same thing. It's the off gas from the metabolic process of growth. When it grows and it consumes nutrition, it puts off this smell. You're really not allergic to the smell. What you're allergic to are things that you can't taste or smell, okay? It's just a volatile organic compound that it produces. When you can go into a house that's dry, and I mean, there's mold all over the walls, all over the ceiling, all over the joists. I mean, it really looks bad, but you can't smell it because it's dry. So once it stops growing, it stops producing the odor. So if you smell the smell, all that tells you is A, mold is there, B, there's enough water for it to grow. All right. How do you inspect for mold? All right. Your handy dandy flashlight. So you walk up to a surface. I do my inspections in the dark. I see some faces that I recognize, but I like doing it in the dark, but you don't shine your flashlight like this. If you shine your flashlight, I hope you guys can see. If you shine your flashlight like this, you can see the texture of the surface. Here, let me get over here. If I do like this, you can see the texture of the surface. Mold looks like fur. It looks just like fur. There may be little patches or big patches that may run entire lengths of a piece of wood, but you can actually see it growing off the surface. Once you see it once, you never forget what it looks like, okay? Now, if we were to open up a cavity and spray hydrogen peroxide in there, it might react. And because we use hydrogen peroxide in our method of cleaning. There's a couple of different chemicals that we use, but hydrogen peroxide is one. Now, there's a difference between using hydrogen peroxide on an overhead floor joist. Inside a wall cavity, you could have a positive reaction, but in actuality, it's bacteria. Cavities have a different living environment than overhead floor joists. So the only way you can tell if that positive reaction is mold is by taking a tape lift. And I'll talk to you about tape lifts here in a minute. Okay, we're going to talk about cavities. I made this yesterday, just for this. Because I wanted folks to be able to see what I'm trying to explain, and when you do it verbally, you know, it has less of an impact than if you actually see it. Pretend this is a wall. All right. So you don't open up a wall cavity unless you have a symptom, like you can see discoloration at the bottom, or you can see the paint bubbling off. under its own weight. You know how paint, it kind of makes those little saddles because it's holding the water in place. Or you can put your finger through it because it's so wet, or there's staining. There's got to be or you get down on your hands and knees and you put your nose against the bottom of the wall and you can smell something. There's got to be a reason why you open a wall cavity. You don't do it just because you want to see what's there. There's reasons for it. There's reasons for it. So let's say, I don't know why I'm doing that. I don't know why I'm doing that. Okay, so what you need to understand about wall cavities is on exterior walls, during the winter, the house is warm, the outside is cold. Heat and moisture always moves from high to low. The drywall is very, very permeable. Heat and moisture goes through drywall pretty easy. So when you open up the wall, I didn't do that. I don't know what I'm getting close to that's causing that to happen. I'm sorry. All right, so when you open up the wall cavity, the thing to remember that if the builder did his job right, this is all going to be stapled, right? All this paper is going to be stapled on the side. And this is a barrier that we use the word vapor barrier, but actually that's not the right word to use. We just use it because everybody's used to using it. But actually this is a vapor retarder. A vapor barrier is plastic. It actually, in the industry, there's actually values that are assigned to the permeability of certain materials. And when you have something that has a 0.1 permeability rate, which is the amount of water that goes through a surface over a 24-hour period, then it's assigned a certain number. So 0.1, anything under 0.1 is plastic, steel, glass. It does not allow any moisture to move through it. This is a vapor retarder. And so it's going to slow down the penetration of moisture, but it's not going to stop it. And it's important to slow that down. So when you take this off and you look at the outside OSB board, the thing to remember is that during the winter, moisture is going to come through, and if you were to open this up, you'd actually see frost. You could actually see water condensation and ice on the backside of your OSB board. This is normal. Don't ever open a wall cavity in the winter and say, oh my gosh. This is really normal stuff. It happens in every single house. You can take little snow cones. You can make little snow cones out of it. There's something that's called water saturation point. Water saturation point, an average 2,000 square foot house can absorb or desorb about 60 gallons of water in a season. And as long as you stay below the fiber saturation point, you're not going to have mold growth. Now, so in normal construction, when this is wet on the inside, it starts to bleed out when it gets warmer. It dries out, and there's very little mold growth inside the cavity. But if you go from the plywood and you use foam board on the outside, you've created a cavity that has a impermeable barrier and then a vapor retarder. You have an impermeable barrier on the outside. Water's not going to go through this. And then you have a vapor retarder on the inside, and the cavity's not going to dry out. And it's going to be wet, and then you're going to get bacteria and growth and all kinds of nasty things. So if there are any builders in the room, please don't do this anymore. This was popular back in the day, and then they've gotten away from it. All right. Another thing you could do, there is a thing called a wall check system. I mentioned about doing everything you can before you open a wall cavity, there is a method of collecting an air sample in a wall cavity. I don't care to do this. And the reason I don't really care to do this is because when you collect your air sample, you don't know if you're dealing with the wood framing material or if you're dealing with the insulation, because mold can grow on either. And let me tell you, we've opened a number of wall cavities up, and there's no mold growth inside the cavity. It's all on the insulation, but you can't see it, you know, it just looks like insulation. So, you know, I know this is real commonplace in the industry. I just wanted to bring it up to say, you know, some folks do this. I don't care to do it. All right, where's my clipboard? Another thing I want to mention, I've gone into a couple of houses recently where all of the walls have been cut up 18 inches in all the bedrooms and the living room, and it's like somebody's just gone in and cut the lower 1.5 feet off of the drywall. I'm going to tell you a story. I always attend 1 or 2 conferences every year. So I think we were down in Texas, and there was a gentleman giving a presentation about before you open a wall cavity, build a chamber so that when you open the wall cavity, what's ever in there doesn't come out. And his example was that there was a master bedroom, and off to the side was a bathroom that had a long history of water damage. Well, he took an air sample, and then he reached down and he pulled a baseboard back. And he said he held it open for about 30 seconds. And then he put it back, and then he waited 2 minutes. And then he took another air sample. The laboratory results of the first one was about 1,700 spores per cubic meter. And that's really, really kind of average. 1,700 is a normal number for a house. The second was 167,000. And all he did was pull the baseboard back for 30 seconds. So anytime we open a wall cavity, we build a chamber so that whatever's in that cavity doesn't come into the home. Because you may, you know, we talked about sensitivity to allergies and so on. I mean, you may be okay with 2,000 or 5,000, but when you're talking 167,000, that's off the charts. We don't want people to get exposed to that kind of quantity, okay? So if you can imagine whoever opened those cavities up all through the house, how many millions and millions of spores he put into the air, because he sprayed hydrogen peroxide and it foamed all up in the cavity. That was a mistake to do, so. All right. Collecting samples for laboratory analysis. You don't hire a consultant to collect samples. You don't do that. You hire consultants to interpret the laboratory data of the samples that you collect, if that makes sense. You should hire a consultant who can write you a report. What did we do? What did we find? Here's the samples we collected. Here's the laboratory results. Here's the conclusions of the assessment, and here's recommendations on what to do. If your consultant doesn't know what chitonium is, you should hire someone else, because chitonium is a very unique, specific mold. And so different mold species tells you a story. Anytime you look at laboratory data, it tells you a story about the environment of the house. And so that's my point. You don't hire someone to collect samples, you hire them to interpret the data. And I've gone into a number of houses where they just say, well, he gave me the report and he said, yeah, we have a lot of something. And then they walked away. And that's not providing a good service. Now, there are two kinds of samples that you're normally going to see people collect. One is a tape lift, which is, it comes in a package like this. And I think they sell these at like box stores. Home Depot and Lowe's and stuff like this. This is probably the only thing I would say that a homeowner could sample and have it correct. It's real simple. It's real simple. It's just a microscope slide that's sticky on one side, and you take the protective plate off, you go up and push it. I had a really interesting experience recently where I thought it was just cement, while they poured the cement and it went splashing up onto the floor joist, because it was little hard concretions, and I thought it was just part of the original construction of the house. But the homeowner said no, she had cleaned it all off, and it grew back in a couple of months. And I went, okay, now you have my interest. But this is a good thing that is the most accurate. You go up and you actually sample what you're looking at. What you don't do is go into a house and you look up and you see all the mold on the overhead floor joists and you collect an air sample. If you see it, there's no reason to collect a sample. It's there. The technical approach of how you remove the mold, or the decision of whether or not you remove, it doesn't matter what kind it is. Inside the envelope of the house, you shouldn't tolerate having mold growth. You may not have a problem, but maybe your cousin will, or maybe your granddaughter, or maybe someone within your family when they come and they visit. Inside the envelope, you should never allow mold to be growing. And I get irritated when I see people collecting an air sample and I'm looking right at it. You see it, figure out how to take it out safely, and how to figure out how to not have it grow again. That's really the focus on what you should be doing. I also want to mention about air quality, collecting samples of air, because there are limitations to this. I don't take a lot of samples. I really don't. I do a lot of litigation with attorneys, and so when I'm taking a sample and I'm going to court, then I'll collect samples so that I can show a photograph and what that discoloration on the surface is. I collect a sample when I can't find it, and people are complaining health issues, that they're suffering from something, but I can't see it, I can't find it, so let's see what's in the air. Or if there's a doctor involved and the doctor wants to specifically know what their patients are being exposed to. There's got to be some compelling reasons for collecting samples. You just don't do it because you know how. All right, so here's a typical cassette that we use. It's just two pieces of plastic, and in the middle here is a little 3/4 of an inch by 1/2 inch sticky plate. And so you attach a pump to the bottom side of this, and it pulls air through a little funnel. There's a little funnel in there, and there's all kinds of design and calculations on how this stuff works. But anyway, the manufacturer of this only recommends that you use 75 liters of air on this cassette. And the reason is that if you can imagine looking down on a pile of logs, trees, and they're piling on top of each other, there's a point where you can't read what's on the bottom. They're piled on top. And so the same thing with this. If you exceed 75 liters, the material's going to be so thick that you're not going to be able to read the quantity or the type that's on the bottom. So that's the reason why they limit it. But if you go into a room that's a 10-foot by 10-foot by 8-foot ceiling, that's 22,600 liters of air. You're collecting 75 of 22,600. Air is very, very homogeneous. Well, it's heterogeneous. There are big balls, there's little balls, there's tiny little balls, there's fragments, there's clumps, there's individual pieces. It's quite a collection of material, and 75 liters just isn't enough. We just don't have another mousetrap that's better than this. So my point is that you can collect two of these at the exact same time, 6 inches apart. One can be 100, The other can be 500, and it's the same result. It's the exact same result. That's the problem that most folks don't understand, is the limitation of the sampling methods that we use here. The literature says that you don't get excited until you see 10 times more inside the house than outside. So if you see 100 of something on the outside, you don't get starting to get excited that you have a reservoir. That's a colony of growth. You don't worry about having a reservoir until you exceed 1,000. I also want to mention one other thing, that when you look at laboratory data, you cannot do what's called a dose-response relationship. What that means is that you can't say that you have 5,000 of something in a sample and that's causing your health issue. You can't do that. Even if you had 20,000, we did some sampling recently. There was 368,000 spores per cubic meter of Aspergillus penicillium in this house. And we still couldn't say definitively that this is what's going to cause you to get sick. And the reason is that the mold spores that we talked about earlier, not all of them contain the poison that we talk about, the mycotoxin. Maybe only 20%, maybe only 25%. Given different conditions, maybe it's 50% or 60%. It's not a ratio, it's not a percentage that's real consistent. Okay. But I think if you were curious about something that's on your floor joist or something, I would do a tape lift if you didn't want to call me. Hopefully you guys will call me. All right. The most common surfaces in a house that mold grows on is varnish, furniture, or leather. One of the two. High oil content. When you handle your gun stocks, your guns, and you put them away, if you don't wipe them off well, then you can get mold growth where you touch the gun stocks. I've seen it 100 times. There are different types of mold that live in different environments. There's 3 basic categories. One is water-loving. Water-loving is something that likes 35% moisture or above, something that's really, really saturated. And so when we talk about Stachybotrys, which is the black mold that everybody's worried about, it requires near saturated conditions. So what you normally do is you find that in mulch. Or you can go out into your yard, dig down into the grass, and you'll find it in the bottom of near the roots of the grass. It doesn't grow on glass or plastic or steel like other molds will. It requires too much water for that. Plus, it has to live on an organic material like paper or wood. That's the only place it's going to grow. The second category below is water-preferring type molds, which is 25 to 35% moisture content. And then below that are water-tolerant molds, which is 15 to 25. Generally, what we talk about is molds germinates at about 21% moisture content, and it'll continue to grow until it dries out to about 15, and then it'll go dormant below 15%. All right. I think I mentioned all that. I also want to mention we talked about Stachybotrys. What Stachy looks like is if you take pepper and you spread it on a white sheet of paper, these little black nodules, that's what it looks like. Alternaria is another type of mold that's black in color. It looks more like someone took a spray can and it's almost like a blanket. And Alternaria is what is used when you go to the doctor and they want to see if you're allergic to mold. They use the Alternaria mycotoxin to test your sensitivity to it because so many people react to that particular mycotoxin. Okay. And again, I want to mention about household dust. We were in a conference where they talked about what is the leading cause of respiratory distress that has absolutely nothing to do with mold. And it's household dust. And again, it's because we shed just like an animal does. Half of the dust in your house is from skin cells. And that high organic material lands on water pipes and all kinds of stuff. And there's just a plethora of little tiny animals that love to chew on that high organic stuff. And then they poop, and then you breathe that in. So everybody, I see a couple of familiar faces. Everyone I meet, I tell them, go down to your basement just once a year and wipe off all your water pipes, wipe off everything with Dawn dishwashing liquid. You don't have to get fancy about it. Dawn has got a great surfactant property, and it'll clean the surfaces off really well. So, and you don't have to get weird about it. Once a year is good enough. All right, we're going to talk about construction science. And I'm going to jump around a lot because I've gone to a lot of houses recently that they could have been thought out a little better. And as a result, the property owner had to do a few things extra that shouldn't have been needed. Now, when you build a new house, you know it takes about 2 or 3 years for it to dry out. So just expect, I think when I built my house, I had to run a dehumidifier for like 3 years before everything dried out the way it felt. I want to define relative humidity. Relative humidity, and this is important to understand. When you're sitting on the back deck and you're seeing your glass of iced tea and there's condensation and there's water dripping down the glass, or when you get up early in the morning and you see the dew on the grass, we all know what that is. It's where the temperature of the air has gone down so far that the water that's in the air precipitates out. It drops out. And that's called condensation. Well, you can control that temperature by increasing or decreasing the temperature of the air. So it's a ratio between how much the air can hold versus how much air is there. So by keeping the same amount of water that's in the air, and by changing the temperature, you can increase or decrease this lower number. So let's say you're sitting on your back deck and you got a glass of iced tea and there's condensation on the glass. So the air that's around you is, say, 80 degrees, and the relative humidity is, say, 65%. As the air approaches the glass, it's getting colder and colder. And as it gets colder, the humidity near the glass goes up because it can't hold as much. So the humidity is going up. And as it makes contact with the glass, the humidity is actually 100%. And that's how you get condensation. People normally experience this in their house. When you have water pipes coming from a wellhead, and you're looking up and that water is coming out of the well at about 54 degrees, and your basement is like 68, and that cold pipe is sweating. That's what we call it, sweating. But actually, that's just condensation. Anytime you see condensation, what triggers in your head? Warm air hitting a cold surface. You have condensation on your windows during the winter, warm air hitting a cold surface. How do you deal with that? There's only a couple of ways. You increase the temperature of the house by 2 degrees. That changes the dew point, and maybe it'll stop condensing on the window. You can create a thermal barrier. You can put plastic on your window, and that'll stop the warm air from hitting that cold window. Or we talk, and I talk a lot about this. I talk a lot, if you can't tell. We talk a lot about minimizing the moisture production in a basement. The basement is where the water comes into the home. The attic is where the water exits. An average family of 4 produces between 2 gallons and 4 gallons of water a day. And the Achilles heel for every house is the attic. If your attic is not ventilated correctly, it's going to be a miserable time living in that house. I can promise you that. So when I go into a house and I see mold growing on furniture, I make a beeline to the attic. I want to make sure that everything is working correctly. And most of the time it's not. You can overload the moisture production in the basement by not having a vapor barrier with a crawl space. If you don't, that's National Building Code, having a vapor barrier in a crawl space. I mean, that's like, duh. That's been going on for 100 years. So you can overload where a normal ventilating attic is receiving so much moisture that it can't take it. And then you'll get mold growth and then elevated humidity. All right. The reason why it's important to monitor the humidity in a home is because if your humidity in the basement is 60 degrees, your wood is acting as a sponge. The wood will actually absorb a certain amount of moisture based on what's available in the air. So if you have 60 degrees, maybe your moisture content will be 12%. If you increase it because of some reason to, say, 70% relative humidity, your moisture content could go to 14% or 15%. If you increase your relative humidity to 75 or 80%, you could hit those golden numbers of 17, 18, 19% moisture content. So this goes back to what I was trying to explain before. An average 2,000 square foot house can absorb or desorb about 60 gallons of water in a season. And this is what I'm talking about. The humidity has a direct relationship on how much moisture the wood is absorbing. The biggest problem in commercial buildings is that they're using steel instead of 2x4s. So they're eliminating that buffer system. So I think my daughter went to college because these people start using steel 2x4s, because the drywall just molds up just in a heartbeat. All right. I want to talk about something that's really, really important because I see this too frequently. I've gone into a couple of houses where people are living in the basement and on the first floor, and they're finishing their second floor. What? Oh, when I do that? Oh, look at that. That's pretty bad, isn't it? Sorry about that. I'm trying to put a B, first floor, second floor, and then attic. All right, so I've gone into too many houses recently where people are living in the basement and on the first floor, and the second floor is under construction. You can't do that. What I mean by this is that if this were a completely occupied, heated home, the moisture that's being created in this house is going through this drywall and this insulation. And then you have the sun beating down. This is called the stack effect. And the attic air gets hot and wants to rise through the ridge vent, and it brings in air from the soffit, and all the moisture inside the home is being removed. Now during the winter, now that's the summer. During the winter, the mechanism is totally different. During the winter, what this attic depends on is the heat from the house. I can go into a house that's been abandoned, not used for only one winter, and This place is just a mess and it's covered with mold growth because there's no heat being provided into the attic as the driver of removing moisture from the home. So if you're going to do this, I rub nickels together just like everybody. If you're going to do this, you have to, before the winter sets in, your exterior walls, you have to insulate and put drywall up. You don't have to tape it, but you have to at least put on the insulation and the drywall. Because if you allow this hot air to go into, let's say this is 70, well, let's put it over here. Say this is 70, and this is 40, and this is 20 in the attic. What's going to happen is this is going to be dew point. You're going to hit dew point on your second floor, and it'll never make it to the attic. Your second floor is acting like the attic, so you're going to get condensation. I mean, I went into one house, I just really felt sorry for this guy, because, and he even worked in construction, and I really felt sorry for him because he was trying to do with other things with his life, but he neglected to finish off the second floor. And he did put insulation up, but he didn't finish it with drywall, and you have to do both. And I just grabbed the insulation and pulled it back, and it was just solid growth on the OSB. And to make matters worse, he listened to somebody. He didn't call me. He listened to somebody. I was there about 7 or 8 years ago. I mean, I really like this kid. And he lived in a house, in a beautiful, picturesque valley kind of thing, beautiful trees. Somebody told him that the trees were causing the mold issue in the home. And so when I drove up to his house, it looked like somebody just taken a chainsaw and cleared out the whole acre of beautiful old growth. I mean, it just broke my heart. So I told him, no, the trees had nothing to do with this. It has to do with the construction science of understanding how moisture goes from one place to another, and the driver is differences in temperature, right? Heat rises, along with heat takes moisture, and so that if you understand the mechanisms of this, you won't tell somebody to cut trees down. Trees don't have anything to do with this. Okay. I want to mention about, we're just going to go right into a couple of other things. Now, on this example that I was just telling you, it's okay to have the second floor under construction. It's not okay not to heat the second floor. You have to heat the second floor, and for you to be able to heat the second floor, that means you have to protect the exterior walls from warm air hitting a cold surface, allowing condensation, and then exceeding fiber saturation point, which is when mold begins to grow. Okay. I want to follow my little thing here, otherwise I'm going to jump around so much. That was a real heartbreaking story, but I've seen it so many times. All right, I had another client who really wanted me to talk about this. So we have a slab on grade floor. Sorry about that. This is slab on grade. Okay, and so you have your little bit of foundation that comes up like so, and you got a footer like here. And you have gravel, like so. And maybe you got some kind of vapor barrier, whatever. So what they did was they put a raised floor right there. Maybe I should do a different color, huh? So they put in a raised floor, like so. It didn't work. And we've taken off these raised floors where there were crawdads living under the floor. It was so wet. So you have to be a little careful if you have slab on grade, you want to put a wood floor on it. First thing you have to do is you have to create a vapor barrier on top of the gravel. So you paint the floor with some kind of concrete floor paint. I don't care what you use, but it needs to be made for a concrete floor. And that creates a a vapor barrier, a vapor retardant, so that the moisture from the concrete slab, because the earth is always going to be giving its love to you, man. It's going to be giving that moisture to you forever. So you need to stop that from making contact with the bottom of your plywood. So you paint the floor, and then you make sure that your drip edge, you've got a gutter that operates correctly, and you don't allow water to hit next to the foundation. Because a lot of that water is going to come right back underneath, hit this gravel, and go underneath your slab. You don't want that to happen. Make sure your gutters work correctly. National Building Code for discharge from a gutter is 15 feet from the foundation of the house. 15 feet. Okay. So, and if it were my house, I would paint the floor, and then I'd put 6 mil plastic down. I mean, I'm not going to tear that floor up again. I'm going to make sure that this works right. And then on the outside, yes, I know color. I love color. And then on the outside, you want to paint that with tar, and you want to make sure that the top of your plywood is, the ground is below, well, actually I'm more interested in the cement. You want to make sure that your ground is sloped away and make sure that the ground is below the top of your concrete slab. Whatever you can do to keep moisture away, that's what you do. So I would paint the floor. So in a conclusion, paint the cement floor, put plastic down on top of it if you want, then build your floor, and then you want to paint with tar the outside of your foundation just up to where the ground is. You don't have to go up above the ground. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. But you want to make sure that your concrete doesn't have a permeability allowing moisture to go into the vault, into this hollow system here. Now, this other gentleman that I worked with, actually, believe it or not, he put on a radon collection unit. He had a really cool solar panel array, and he actually installed a radon collection system and pulls the moisture out from below his slab. The reason he did it is because he replaced the floor twice. He wasn't going to do it a third time. So we worked together, and that's what he did. And I think it's going to work for him. Yep. And just be aware there are a lot of laws and rules and federal regulations about installing radon collection systems. Okay, that's that. All right. Again, just be aware I'm jumping around because I want to hit some of the houses that I've looked at and make sure that we talk about this. Because there's a thing called ghosting. All right. Roof line, vaulted ceiling, like this. Okay? All right. So, then you got this. All right. What is ghosting? When you finish a vaulted ceiling, you have, a typical soffit like this, and the way you're supposed to finish, the way you're supposed to construct vaulted ceilings, you have drywall or you have planking, whatever you want to do for the final thing that you see. Behind that, you have paper-backed insulation, like that. And then behind that, you have baffles. And what a baffle is, when you go to the store and you buy a dozen eggs, that thin styrofoam that the eggs come in? They sell those in 4-foot-long sheets. And there are these little pooches. And what you do is you install the pooches toward the underside of the roof, and it allows a 1-inch air gap. So the moisture that's coming in from the house is going to go through the drywall, go past the paper retardant, go through the insulation, hit the baffle, and this air, sun, hit, hot, it's going to take the moist air through the baffle and out through the ridge vent, just like any other construction. What happens over and over is with these vaulted ceilings, somebody forgets to put in the baffle. So when you're looking up, what you're going to see is like water dripping out of your insulation, and you're going to see water flowing down your walls. Where the drywall comes together, that tape will fail, and you'll see water coming out of that seam. And it's pretty ugly looking. There's nothing you can do about it except take the wall, take that whole ceiling down, and take out the insulation. It's gone. And then remove the mold, because there's going to be a lot of mold on the underside of the roof decking. And then rebuild after the mold's taken away. And baffles, insulation, drywall, however you want to finish it. It's the only thing you can do, because that ghosting is never going to stop. And it's only going to get wet, and then your roof will fail and collapse because it's rotting. Oh, another thing I want to mention about this same thing. If you go into a vaulted ceiling and you look up, and here's the ridge vent, and here are the trusses, like this, you know, and you see the truss, you can see the shadow of the truss, and you're going, you know, is that mold? And it's not. What it is insulation is a better retarder for heat than the truss is. The truss will transmit temperature much, much easier than the insulation is. So the truss is colder in the winter. And so there's condensation, a small micro amount of condensation on that truss, and then dust from the house lands on that condensation, and it's just dirt. That's all it is. It's just house dust. That's all it is. You can't do anything about it. You can repaint the ceiling, but it's going to come back. So again, what do you do when you have condensation? It's controlling humidity. You increase the temperature of the house by 2 degrees, and you start focusing on how to lower the humidity production in the house. Whether it's the way you do your laundry or paint the foundation walls, however you have to do it. Temperature and water production are how you control humidity in a situation like this. Okay? All right. I've only seen 2 people go to sleep. I think that's pretty good. They haven't fallen out of the chair yet. All right. So I go into these 2 houses in the same week, and I experienced something I've never seen before. So here's a basement. Let's go back to the basement. An average 1,000 square foot basement, if the block has not been painted, will allow about 1 gallon of water vapor to pass through the block every day. If you paint the foundation walls with any kind of vapor retardant paint, whether it's dry lock or watertight, whatever you want to choose, you'll drop that to 1 gallon a month. So I always encourage people to paint their foundation walls and to keep them in good shape. So I go into these 2 houses, and what's interesting is they say, Bob, there are times when I walk into my basement and the floor is so wet, I can barely walk on it. It is so wet and slick that I can't barely walk on it. And I'm going, well, what do I know about dew point? Because that's what it is. So the earth down here is at about 54 degrees. That's kind of average. And the basement is like 4 feet into the ground, maybe 5 feet, depending. So if you were to measure with your little handy-dandy thermal laser thermometer, you know, you can measure the temperature at a distance of anything. What you'll find is that your cement is, say, about maybe let me just guess and say maybe 63 degrees. All right? So there's a thing called humidity stratification. What that means is that temperature and humidity in a basement goes like this. Now you can break this up by opening a door or just simply walking through the room, but this is not uncommon at all. So if you have 80% relative humidity down in this lower area at some temperature, you'll have 70% up here, and you'll have 60% up here, and you'll have 50 up here. So when you walk in the basement, it feels really kind of normal because you're way up here. But a foot or two down below, and then a foot or two down, that's why everybody complains, gee, my feet are cold when I go in the basement. Like, duh. So if you take the humidity and temperature, and then you measure the temperature of the cement, you'll be below dew point. And that's what's causing this. So what do we do with dew point? We increase the temperature of the basement, or we lower the humidity production. Most people do their laundry in the basement. Most people do. So what we want to do in a basement, we want to control humidity by, if you have a washing machine, a spinner, whatever you want to do, there's a hole on the bottom of that, and then you've got a floor drain, right? And you don't want the water to hit the concrete floor and flow across to the drain. We don't want to do that. We don't want a flow of water from point A to point B. What we want to do is we want to move that thing over here and put a pipe so that the water goes straight from the machine into the floor. That's like when you do laundry 3 times a week. This means a big production of water that you can avoid. So everything we do is about humidity and water. The next thing I want to tell you is I've been into so many houses that have a shower, a shower in the basement. You're putting a shower in the coldest part of the house. Humidity. Lower the temperature, you increase the humidity. You put a shower in the basement, that's the coldest place. Right off the bat, you're going to have high humidity conditions in the basement. We don't want that. Move your shower to the first floor where it's an occupied space. It's, everything we do is talking about this. So we want to paint our foundation walls. We want to paint our foundation walls, paint the floor to the basement if we can, unless you got some reason you don't want to do it. They make beautiful color paint. I mean, just gorgeous stuff nowadays. It's not the old classic ugly gray anymore. We want to reduce the humidity by doing the laundry and having the water discharge directly into a drain. Get rid of your shower in the basement, put it upstairs on the first floor. I know that a lot of people hang their laundry during the winter, only in the basement. Only do that during the winter when you can't put it outside. I forgot what I heard once. How many gallons come out of each load of laundry, and I mean it's a lot. I mean it's several pounds of water that comes off of a line every single time you hang it. So. All right, let's go through that. All right. All right. The basement again. First floor. You have to heat the basement. Let me say that again. You have to heat the basement. You cannot heat the first floor and ignore the basement. A lot of people think the basement is just a utilitarian part of the house that doesn't have to be paid attention to. That is absolutely not true. I'm going to say again, the basement is where the moisture comes in and accumulates in the house. Yes, people by breathing and showering and cooking and all the other stuff we do as human beings, they produce a lot of that moisture on the first floor, but you cannot ignore the basement. And the driver to remove the moisture from the basement is heat. You have to heat the basement. You can heat the first floor as well, But to pull this moisture out of the basement and prevent mold on your overhead floor joists and on your foundation walls, you got to put heat in there during the winter. A lot of houses I go to are daylight basements, so the ground is out here. My house is daylight, so I have a door that goes right out to the backyard. That gets really, really, really cold during the winter. So I had to put up walls and I had to insulate those exterior walls. Again, the lower the temperature, the higher the humidity. I had to keep the humidity below 60%. So the basement has to be controlled with temperature and humidity. So put a wood stove. Propane puts a lot of water out. Don't ever use unvented heaters. Always use a vented heater, because the production of any kind of a fuel is going to go into the house instead of outside the house. And if you burn propane, that's a lot of water that's going to go into the home. Plus, you need carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide meters if you're going to use a non-ventilated heater system. I met a fellow about 10 years ago. I loved his house. I thought this is the most creative thing I've ever seen. So he had a really powerful heater in the basement, and he had a series of holes in his floors to allow the heat to come up. And then he had pipes on the second floor, on the four corners of the house. He had pipes that went from the second floor down to the basement. And when this was operating, I got to see his house during the winter. And when this was operating, the heat went up, and hot air rises, cold air drops. So there was a convection system that had developed, just like that. And I went over to one of the pipes, and I went like this. I went, oh my gosh, that is like the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life. So I don't know if it was unique to his house, but I had to tell this story because I want you guys to heat your basement. And so this is what he did, and he did a really good job. The first house I ever had was, it had what's called an octopus furnace. There's no fans to it. It heated, and it used gravity of the warm air rise, cold air drop. And it worked. It worked. I hated it, but it worked. All right. Okay. I want to mention something else about the basement. The coldest surface in your basement is called the joint zone. And that's a fancy little word for the lower 3 or 4 inches of your foundation right on the outside. This is the coldest spot in your basement. So when you go down into the basement, I've seen this 100 times, and you see mold growing on that lower 3 inches all the way down the side of your house, I want you to realize it's condensation. This is condensing right here. What do we do with condensing? Raise the temperature, lower the humidity. Think about how to stop water from getting produced in the basement. So this is called a joint zone, and it's going to come back again and again and again. You can remove that with just soap and water. I do it differently, but I tell homeowners, if you want to take mold off your foundation walls, you can use Dawn dishwashing liquid, some elbow grease, safety glasses, rubber gloves. But it can be done, but I need for you to realize that until you raise the temperature 1 or 2 degrees higher, that's going to come back again and again and again. Okay? And it's just growing on the surface of the paint. If you've painted your foundation walls, it's just going to grow on the surface, but it's going to get ugly again. And it's going to be, most of the time, it's alternaria, which is that type 1 allergen that we've already talked about, flu, hay fever, respiratory distress, stuff like that. All right. The joint zone, that's what that's called. I'm trying. Okay. We've talked already a lot about this. I jump around, but it's only because it comes in my head, and I want to say it at the time I'm saying it. All right. I want to make sure that everyone understands that building materials have different permeability values that are attached to it. That's important for you to know. When you're building a house, you never put on the insulation. You never do this like board, that foam board, and create an exterior impermeable surface. Then you put in the insulation, then another vapor retarder, because what's inside that wall cavity is never going to dry out. And then it'll just start getting wet and moldy and bacteria and stinky and yeah, all that. I went into a house recently that the smell coming, it was an English house back in the day, and the smell coming out of the electrical sockets was, I mean, I just couldn't believe what it was. So he ended up selling his house. He was afraid of trying to deal with that issue. I have a bunch of numbers here. I wrote it down just in case anybody was totally curious academically. But I wrote down a lot of permeability values. The measurement of fluid through a surface is called a perm, and it's the measurement of liquid 1 square inch that goes through a material over a 24-hour period. And like, for example, unfaced fiberglass insulation, there's 168 perms. House wrap, you know, that you put on the outside is between 11 and 50 perms. Let's see, OSB board, 3/8 inch OSB board is 2 perms. So it's almost kind of like a semi-permeable material. I see a lot of foil-faced insulation board on houses. I don't know why people use that, but that's an impermeable material. You might as well be just putting up a sheet of steel on the outside of your house because it's not gonna breathe. Foam board is 1 perm. Wood lap siding is 35. Vinyl lap siding is 70. Okay, let's talk about attic ventilation systems for a minute. Okay, we've already talked about how much water is produced in the house. We've already talked about the sun hitting the attic and the attic getting hot, and the air wants to come in through the soffit, through the ridge vent, like this. There are a couple of weaknesses that I always look at when I do an inspection. One, I always want to see 100% perforation in the soffit. The reason is that trusses act like guardrails. Air wants to go from the soffit to the ridge vent in a straight line. It's not going to go this way. It's not going to go this way. It's going to go straight from here to there. So you want to have perforated soffit between those 2 trusses. Next, you want to have a baffle between each truss. You don't do a baffle every other truss or every 4th truss. You want to have a baffle between each and every truss. Again, air's going to move from the soffit to the ridge vent. I can't tell you how many times I've seen where I go into an attic and here's a baffle and there's no mold growth. I move over, there's no baffle, and it's solid growth. Move over, no baffle, solid growth. Move over, there's a baffle, no growth. Put a baffle between each one. It costs $1.50, you know, just put a baffle between each truss. The other thing I want to mention is I can't tell you how many times I've gone to a house, there's beautiful perforated soffit that, and I pull the soffit down and it's plywood. There's no ventilation above the perforated soffit. So even though you see it, you can't believe it's real. You gotta pull it down and you gotta look at it to make sure that it's working correctly. Next thing is the ridge vent. They're not all made the same. Here, let me show you this. This is really cool. This is a ridge vent. It's in cross section, but I love this little thing. What you need is 1.5 inch cut at the very top of your roof. It doesn't look very big. I mean, when I first saw that, I went, oh, you're kidding me. But anyway, you just need 1.5 inches because there are national building codes for this stuff. So you need 18 square inches per linear foot. So 1.5 inch cut per 12 inches gives you 18 inches. And then down in the soffit, you need 9 inches over here and 9 inches over here. And that gives you 9 and 9 is 18, and that's called a balanced system. What you don't want is a 3 inch cut on top and 9 inches down low, because when you have too much high and not, you have an unbalanced system, when the air hits the roof, goes up to the ridge vent, the air can go into the attic, and you can see a drip line below the ridge vent, and that's a negative. You don't want to do that. You can actually create a positive air pressure if the ridge vent is bigger than the soffits. When you inspect for a ridge vent, there are several different types. I don't know if I can do this one. When I go into a house, I want to be able to stick my fingers between the shingle and the underside of the ridge vent, because the distance between the ridge vent and the shingle has to be 3/4 of an inch. Because if you have 3/4 of an inch on one side, 3/4 of an inch on the other side, that gives you an 1.5 inch opening. A lot of the cheap ridge vents, they cut that down to 1/4 inch. So you may have an 1.5 inch cut, but you only have actually a 1/2 inch opening. That's all the air is going to come out for. So anyway, I'll leave this up if anybody wants to look at it. I love this one. This is called a Shingle Vent 2. It's made by Air Vent, and the reason I like it is, and this is spec'd for Schumacher houses and Kehovanian houses. They are required to use this ridge vent. And the reason is when the air hits the roof, comes up, it's called a Bernoulli effect. It actually creates a negative air pressure on this side of the ridge, and it will actually suck air out of the attic. You can actually see it sucking air out. So that's why everybody uses this one. And there are other manufacturers that may accomplish the same thing. I just like their product, that's all. All right, so let's see. 18 square inches per linear foot, 9 square inches on either side. Make sure that there's no plywood in the middle. Have a baffle between each truss. And I also want to mention this. I'm sorry that you guys can't see this. I'll try to move away. When you put in a baffle against the roof, you want to make sure that you put some batt insulation right down here. And you want to stuff it between where the roof ends, and where the roof goes, where the ceiling of the second floor goes, and then there's the baffle. There's going to be a gap there of about 2 inches. You need to stuff that with batt insulation. The reason is when the wind hits the when the wind hits the wall, air's going to come up and it'll push the insulation back away from the wall, away from the soffit. That's called wind erosion. And I've gone into some houses where the insulation has been pushed back 4, 5, 6 feet. I'm looking at the drywall of the bedroom below me. So you just need to have a little bit of batt insulation to stop that wind from coming up and pushing the insulation back. Wind erosion is what that's called. Okay. Symptoms for poor ventilated attics. If you go up into the attic, let's start in the attic. You go up to the attic and you see rusty nail heads. That's the first indication. Second, because I've gone into houses that are 50, 60 years old and nails are shiny, bright and shiny, and it's because the attic is ventilating correctly. If it's poor ventilation, you're going to have condensation on the nail heads because that's where dew point is hit first. Then you look down and you can see where water has dripped off the nail head and has drilled little holes in the insulation. It looks really strange, but you'll just see it all over the place, like a little animal created holes in the insulation. If you do it in the winter, you can actually see icicles hanging off the nail heads. You'll see ice on the underside of the ridge vent. I mean, I've taken my finger and done this. So I want to mention about steel roofs. Steel roofs are fine. There's no problem with steel roofs. But the Achilles heel of a steel roof is going to be how the ridge vent is connected to the roof. There's a couple of different ways to marry those two together. And you want to make sure that you're not creating a method of compression where that union is compressing where air can't get out. I went to like five, I'm not kidding, I went to 5 houses in 1 week with a steel roof, and they used the wrong.
You're going to have time for questions if you want to start earlier than 8 o'clock.
But I'm having a good time.
Your choice.
Okay. Okay. Are we wanting to stop the talk at 8 and then do questions, or do you want to stop pretty quick? Because I got some other stuff that we could talk about, but I want to make sure that everybody's comfortable with the time requirements here. Huh? Melvin? Do you want me to stop before 8 o'clock for questions, or do you want me to stop at 8 and then do questions after that?
I just have a quarter till.
Quarter till? I got about 12 minutes. Okay. Symptoms of poor ventilation then. Rusty nails, icicles on the nails during the winter, drilling holes. If you have mold growing on your furniture, go into your attic, because you should not have mold growing on your furniture. If you walk into your house and you feel that it's really humid, but it's not humid outside, the temperature in an attic should be no more than 10 degrees warmer than the outside. If it's 80 degrees outside, it shouldn't be no more than 90 degrees in your attic. They've shown that again and again and again. Sweating on windows, high humidity, mold growth. I think it's pretty close. I think it's pretty good. I want to mention about attic insulation. I prefer fiberglass to cellulose. I've gone in too many houses that are old that have cellulose insulation in it, and it compresses under its own weight. So I like fiberglass. I go into these fiberglass houses that have been around for 20, 30 years, and boy, they're just fluffy, and it's just, you know, as I kick it, it feels like it was just put down a few days ago. So I like fiberglass, blown-in fiberglass insulation. Do not spray foam, if I may be so bold. Don't spray foam the underside of your attic. If you do this, if you spray foam the underside of your roof decking, you have to have a method of pulling air out of the attic and removing the moisture that's in the attic. You know, English houses, they have furnaces and air conditioners, so we put in duct systems, and we incorporate the attic into the rest of the house. So we can't do that in our community. So don't use spray foam. Use a traditional ventilation system for an attic, and you'll be just fine. All right. I want to mention about knee wall construction. I got 10 minutes, knee wall construction. This is another little hot topic. Oh, Mary, let's develop our attic and put some kids up there. Yeah, right. All right, you can do it, but you have to do it correctly. All right, so here's your attic, and let's do like that. And so you come to about belt high, and you put a vertical wall, and then you bring it up to about here, and then you make a little mini attic right about there, and then you come down, and then another wall. Okay? The biggest problem that I see contractors doing when they do a knee wall construction is they don't put baffles in. You insulate this, and you insulate down here, and then you have to put in a baffle so that the air that comes in from the soffit has a way of continuing to migrate to the ridge vent. Because the moisture inside the house still has to get a way up. If you don't put in a baffle right here, it's going to go through that drywall, hit the insulation, and have nowhere to go. So you have to put in a baffle with knee wall construction from here to there. All right, what's the next one? Fruit cellars. Let's talk about fruit cellars. I got 8 minutes. All right, a lot of fruit cellars are developed underneath a concrete slab front porch. That's really, 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 really common. A lot of contractors don't do that anymore because there are all kinds of inherent issues with this. If you're going to do this, then you have to keep the concrete during the winter is going to get really cold. The air from the basement's going to come in here. And so you're going to have whatever temperature down here, then you're going to have 15 or 20 degrees of your concrete slab. To make it so that you don't have condensation, you have to put like a 1 or 1.5 inch foam board on the underside of the slab. And if your ground is out here, you have to go at least 3 feet below the ground. So you're going to have to come down here and put more foam board below. Before you do that, you really need to paint the foundation walls with whatever vapor retardant paint that you like, dry lock or whatever. But this will stop the condensation and also the migration of moisture in here. And then you put on a louvered door. You don't use a solid door on pantry rooms. Use a louvered door. Because if moisture does get in here and it goes to 70–80% relative humidity, there's a thing called osmotic pressure. Water wants to go from a high concentration to a low concentration. Heat wants to go from a high concentration to low concentration. So the moisture wants to go through that door. Just put some slats in it. And the coolness that you want will stay, but the moisture will be able to come through the slats. Another thing is that if you do have some shelves in here and you have mold growth on it, I just want you to be aware that you don't have to throw your food away. I've heard people do that. And so you have to clean empty jars really well, but just because you have mold contamination in your pantry doesn't mean that it's affected your food inside the jars. There's no communication. I mean, those jars are sealed. There's nothing going in or out of those jars, or they would explode, right? I'm sure everybody has seen that. All right. 6 minutes. Okay. We talked about doing laundry in the basement. If I could suggest, don't use a water hose in your basement. Don't clean your floor using a water hose. If you have to clean your floor, you shouldn't have to do it that often. If you take the water directly from the tub into the drain, you shouldn't have spillage, that kind of thing, so you don't have to worry about cleaning the floor. But if you do, use a mop. That's the difference between 5 gallons versus a half a gallon. Everything I think about is how to reduce the amount of water that's going into the air. So don't ever use a water hose inside the envelope of the house. All right, so we talked about doing laundry, hanging laundry. Okay, removing mold. 5 minutes. What I tell people on how to remove mold is not the way I do it. I do it differently than what I tell people to do because I have to meet national standards. There's 3 national guidelines that we do. I have to do things in a way that is defendable if someone calls me and says, why did you do this? So what I tell people is soap is your friend. Don't use bleach. Don't use vinegar. You don't have to go out and buy anything special. The only thing we use is Dawn dishwashing liquid. And I want to mention something to you. If you buy a product for this, make sure it's in the original container with the manufacturer's label on it. Don't buy something that is from a friend with a label on it, mold be gone. There's no such thing as that. The reason why you want the manufacturer's label, for you to sell anything in America, you have to either have FDA approval, Food and Drug Administration, or you have to be registered with the EPA, one or the other. So when you read the label on the back, it has the ingredients. You ought to know what's in the label. It'll also describe how to use it, what are the directions of use. When you register with EPA a product, it says you can sell this, but only in accordance with the manufacturer's directions. What are the directions? How do you protect yourself, your skin, breathing? What phone number do you call if one of your kids drinks it? You need information that's off the original label. All right, so
You have time.
I'm being told that, you're asking me 3 minutes early.
Yeah.
My watch is right. Okay, all right. Okay, so my point is, the way we do mold remediation, the way we remove mold, is we build a barrier. We put that room under negative air pressure. We got these machines that suck air out. And then we remove the mold using HEPA vacuums or chemicals, and then we clean, clean, clean. On an average 5-day job, the preparation is a day and a half. The removal is only a day. And then there's 3 days of cleaning. The difficulty of the work is in the preparation and in the cleaning. It's not in the mold removal. That's the easy part. That's no work at all. So soap is your friend, scrub brush, soapy water, and wear eye protection. And I know everybody's got a beard but me. And so anyway, be really careful by breathing this stuff in. All right. All right, I think that's about it. Is there any other critical thing I wanted to mention? Oh, I got to mention this. I got a minute and a half. All right. If you go to bed at night and you start coughing, I want you to think about a mattress encasement. And what that means is that you could have dust mites in your mattress, and when you get in bed, that plume that's created by your compression of the mattress could be coming up and breathing. So what you use is either a cotton or a polyester encasement that has 400 threads per inch. Now, if you're buying a new mattress, you can use a polyurethane liner, and that will not allow the dust mites to get established in your mattress. So I just wanted to mention that. I thought that was very, very important for folks to know. Okay. Okay, so first question. I could have Vanna White here holding my bucket. All right, so how long after the house is built do you paint the blocks? It's really not the blocks that have an issue, it's gonna be the grout, because it takes a little time. And the concrete takes a while to cure. So I would say I wouldn't be finishing a basement for maybe a year. I know, I have no one to help me. I feel so neglected, And I try so hard. Our home has vinyl siding with insulation behind it, and the house wrap behind that. Would that cause a problem?
That's like a cedar max siding, it's got the insulation on the back side of the siding.
So you're outside, from the outside you've got vinyl, then you pull the vinyl back and you have foam board?
The insulation is made on the siding as you buy it.
Oh, on the siding itself, sure. There isn't there a manufacturer over in Navarre that makes that?
Provia?
Yeah, Provia?
No, Provia doesn't make the insulation on it, but it's a cedar max siding
Okay.
that's got insulation formed right up on the insulation.
And then you have house wrap behind that.
Yeah.
I've never heard of that being an issue. There is breathing, even though there's insulation there. I guess I haven't seen a lot of that, to be honest with you. And so my question is, if water gets in behind the vinyl, how does the water bleed out? Regular vinyl has got all kinds of holes underneath it. How does the water bleed out from behind? Anybody know? How does water bleed out behind this kind of a insulated siding? I can't hear you, dude. Oh, it does. Okay, then I would say no problem, because the permeability of vinyl siding is like off the charts. So if the same air gap is allowing the interior to breathe, you're good. Is there a vent system for bathrooms without fans? No. Now, I'm telling you what I'm working with right now. There's a gentleman that I'm working with, and he has a crawl space that he just put in a beautiful vapor barrier. And he's had such a problem with mold growing on the first floor that even though he's got this vapor barrier down, it's a big crawl space. In fact, there's 2 of them attached. That I'm looking for a company that can put a small, like 100 CFM fan in the holes that he's drilled through the foundation. You shouldn't, by the way, you shouldn't ventilate a crawl space in Ohio. So I'm trying to find some small 100 CFM fans that can operate on solar. I haven't found anybody. Everybody wants to plug them in. But if we could do that and it could just run 12-hour days, that would make a big difference. I just worry about moisture collecting in this crawl space, even though he's done everything right. All right. How important is it to have a second floor upstairs heated if it's finished and using then? Basement is minimally heated, first floor is hot. Okay. Basement is minimally heated. All right. The basement has to be heated. I guess to answer the question about how much heat is enough for the basement, I'd put a temperature humidity meter down there and see where it is when you're operating it at, say, 65 degrees. And if the humidity is above 60, increase the temperature by 2 degrees and see where that humidity drops to. I guess it's one of those things where you have to measure the humidity and determine what's the proper temperature. How important is it to have the second floor upstairs heated? Well, you got to have it heated. You can't have the second floor unheated, even though it's occupied. The second floor has to be heated. So leave the door open and let the heat go upstairs. Sorry, guys. It's got to be heated, or you're not going to have a mechanism getting it up into the attic. It's going to get stuck on the second floor. Is it okay to insulate inside of exposed basement walls? Inside of exposed basement walls, if outside is not painted. Ooh. Is it better to spray foam walls than bat insulation? There's a lot of questions in that. Is it okay to insulate the inside of exposed basement walls? Am I understanding that right?
That's the wall be exposed on the outside, above grade.
Well, I've not seen that before. Normally the insulation stops at ground surface. I haven't seen the insulation go up to the bottom side of the house. Is that what you're talking about?
You mean on the inside?
Is it okay to insulate inside of exposed basement walls? I guess I'm not following this. So we have a basement wall. Is it okay to insulate the inside of exposed basement walls? So are we saying insulate here?
Right, and this ground level here.
Okay, you have to paint this with a tar. And then on top of the tar, you use that little bubble roll of bubble wrap. I don't know what you call it. Do you know what it's called, Chris? Well, you tar the outside and you put this bubble wrap. It's a hard plastic that's got little pooches on it. And then you gravel it out the outside, so if water gets in behind it, you'll still hit the tar. It'll still come down to the baseboard.
But they're talking about the ground level would be here, and this would be exposed to elements.
No.
And then the insulate on the inside.
You can insulate the inside. Yeah, you can insulate the inside if it's above ground. Yeah, sure. Oh, okay. Is it better to spray foam walls than bad insulation? I'm assuming that we're still talking about the interior foundation walls? Yeah, that's not a bad idea.
They spray foam inside the block.
Oh, inside the block.
Instead of.
Oh, yeah, you can do that. Yeah. One of the ways that you handle crawl spaces is that you can spray foam the foundation walls instead of painting and putting up the board and all that stuff. You can apply a spray foam to the inside block of a crawl space. That's really sweet. It's expensive, but it's really sweet. Okay. Is it okay to paint inside of block walls? If outside is not tarred, you have to tar.
Tar thorough paint. Above grade you paint it, below grade you
Is it okay to paint the inside of the block walls if outside is not tarred? Okay, so we're saying we don't have any tar on the outside. Is it okay to paint the inside instead of digging down to the footer drain and tarring this the way it should have been done in the first place? You can try it. I mean, I don't think, instead of painting it, I probably would call somebody, a waterproofing company, and I have a couple of them that I like, but I'm not going to, I don't want to promote people inappropriately. I would, instead of painting the walls, I would call a basement waterproofing company and put the correct material on, which is a hard plastic. And then they dig down here, and then they drill holes, and any water that goes in through the foundation is collected in this little sump, and then it goes to a drain. That's the way that works. It won't make it worse, though. It just won't control water. What is a good alternative to radon collection system? Not having radon? I mean, what is a good alternative to radon collection? I'm not aware, when we talk about radon, this is a heavily controlled service by the federal government. I took the class to become a consultant for that. It was truly the hardest class I ever took in my life, next to organic chemistry. I don't know of any passive radon collection system that's available for people. It's actually a negative air pressure withdrawal that runs 24/7. Now, this other gentleman, this other client of mine, he has a solar panel system, and it runs that way. So, there are ways to put them in. Are non-vented gas heaters as bad as non-vented propane? Propane is the worst. The propane will put out more gallons per gallon of propane than anything else, and I would never use a non-vented heater in my house. If you have to, put in a carbon monoxide meter, put in a combustible gas indicator, think of anything that you can for monitoring the combustion of that or the improper combustion. And don't forget, your fire department will come over for free, and they'll make sure that you don't have leaking gas pipes connections. Is it proper to save basement after a house was removed because of mold? Oh gosh. Is it proper to call Bob before we tear the house down so that we could save the basement? We don't have to tear the house down. Yes. Call me before you tear a house down. I'm serious. Don't ever have anybody tell you to tear a house down. I'm going to jump off on a tangent. I had a client of mine tell me a story that there's a fellow who's actually coding every 2x4, every 2x6, every 2x12, every sheet of plywood with some kind of mumbo-jumbo stuff. And then he's building the house with this coated material. And when I'm hearing this story, I don't know how to react, because I've been doing this for a really, really, really long time. Lots of gray hair. Really long time. And I've never heard of anyone doing this. You just don't do it. That shows a complete lack of understanding of construction science and moisture control. You don't have to do that. You don't have to do it. So to answer your question, can you save the basement? You have to look at the basement and how it's put together. Is it tarred? It's got to be tarred, right? And you have to have footer drains. And, so there's a basic consideration of any foundation before you put a house on top of it. Don't tear houses down unless you call me. And I'll tell you not to tear it down. Do I paint a basement wall inside or out? On the inside. And you only have to paint the exterior foundation walls. You don't have to paint the interior walls because there's no migration of moisture through that wall, right? Do I paint basement inside or out? Inside. Ooh, this is a long one, two-colored.
No, it's just two same.
Oh, okay. How do you feel about closed cell foam blown up against the roof? I think we answered that. We don't want to do that. because without electricity, you can't pull that air out of the attic and have the moisture that's created in the home from being removed. You can't do it. Any advice on a house with open cell insulation on the underside of the roof with no vents? Ouch. Attic is the same temperature as the rest of the house. Yeah, but I bet you the humidity is not. The person's comment is, any advice on a house with open cell insulation sprayed on underside of roof with no vents? Attic is the same temperature as the rest of the house. But I can promise you that the humidity is going to be hugely different. The temperature may be the same, but the amount of, it's called grains of moisture, the weight of water, the way we measure moisture content into the air is called grains, and it's 0.065 grams. And that's how we measure moisture, and you're going to have a lot more moisture in the attic than you will anywhere else. You know, we went to a conference, and they were talking about how to remove spray foam. It's a big deal to remove spray foam, and that was not a good idea to do. I don't have any advice for you, except to remove it. Is a dehumidifier only enough to save a basement from mold? Okay, let's talk about that for a second. Dehumidifiers remove the water that's in the air. A fan dries the building out. So if you put a fan on a wet surface, that water that is stripped out of the wood from evaporation is picked up by the dehumidifier. The dehumidifier itself will not dry a building out. You have to have this relationship between the fans and the dehumidifier. So is a dehumidifier only enough to save the basement from mold? The dehumidifier is treating the symptom. The symptom is too much water in the air. The problem is too much water being allowed to penetrate through the foundation walls, the laundry being done in the basement, which is flowing across the floor, not heating the basement enough, and when you have a cold basement, you have high humidity. I would say, let's not go with dehumidifiers. Let's deal with the problems that are being caused, that is causing the introduction of water into the living space. If you can't do it and you have to use a dehumidifier, then yes, a dehumidifier will work. And when you use a dehumidifier, there are good ones and there are lousy ones and there are better best ones. The best one that I know of, and I put this in Tuscarawas County Library Archive, I've put a bunch of these in crawl spaces that had limited access. I buy my dehumidifiers from John Schrock at Superior Basement. He's over in Sugar Creek. He has a piece of equipment that's made to run 24/7, and you turn it on and you grow old. That's basically what you do. And you do a little cleaning of the filters, but that's it. It'll last the rest of your life. How do you raise in lower temperature in the basement in the summertime? How do you raise and lower the temperature? Well, it's easy to raise the temperature during the summertime, right? All you have to do is add heat, right? Lower the temperature in the basement. Keep your windows closed. Oh, let me also mention this. See, keep thinking about things. In your pantry that we talked about, don't ever have a window open during the summer in your food pantry. I go into a lot of these, and I'm looking at this window that's open, and it's 90 degrees outside. Don't do that. You're allowing hot air to come into a cold room, and you can look on the top of the ceiling, and there's condensation all over the ceiling. Don't do that. If you want to have a window open, do it in the spring or the fall, but don't have a window open in your pantry during the heat of the summer. That's bad. I don't know how to tell you to lower the temperature in a basement during the summer, except maybe if it's a daylight basement, put some kind of a thermal barrier on the exterior walls, and that'll cool your basement down, because then the cool will be coming from the floor, and it'll cool off your basement. You have to stop that penetration of either heat or cold coming in through the exterior foundation walls. Do you recommend putting insulation on the outside of the OSB? No. What do you say about bathroom vents or insulated toilet tanks? Well, with bathroom vents, you have to have power to pull the air out. They've made some really big changes to bathroom vents over the last, say, 3 years, because we're building houses so tight that builders today put a fan on the second floor that never turns off. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, but it's so quiet. I bought one, and I go into my bathroom, and I'm going, I can't tell if that's on. And I look at it, and I can't tell. I have bad hearing anyway, but I can't tell it's running. That's pretty amazing. Insulate toilet seats. Cold, warm air hitting a cold surface, water coming into the tank is cold. The only thing you can do is put some kind of insulation wrap on it, and they sell those. That'll stop the condensation from occurring. All right, the base of our toilets basically touches the baseboard. Now condensation. Let me mention something. This is really important that everyone understand this. You have a sheet of plywood. You have high humidity. You've met your fiber saturation, and you get mold growth on your plywood. The penetration of that mold into that plywood is pretty small. It's very, 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 very thin. The only time you really have a problem within the OSB board is when it delaminates and it can get behind it. You remove the mold off that OSB board, you're good to go. Now, if you lay this flat, and then you put a toilet on it, and the ring is leaking, and the water is going from one side of the plywood to the other, the water is going to go through the engineered building materials, and you will get mold growth between the layers. You have to cut that out. So with this scenario of humidity, you can remove the mold off the surface. With this scenario where water is penetrating through the building material, you got to cut it out because there's going to be mold between the layers. Sound like a plan? Okay. The base of our toilets basically touches the baseboard. Now condensation caused mold. I think the condensation will go away if you put one of those toilet wraps on it, and then your problem is solved. For the mold issue, just use soap and water. That's all I would do. You may have to cut a little drywall up and look on the back side, because when you have that base plate and the water goes in underneath it and wicks up, you could get a little bit of mold on the back side of the drywall. Just cut it out. Do you think a properly ventilated home can be mold-free without a dehumidifier? Yes. Air purifier, do you want ozone or non-ozone? Don't use ozone. Ozone has its place. Ozone is really good for fires. If you have a couch that has been in a fire and you get that gross smell, you can put that in an ozone generating machine, leave it in there for maybe a half hour, 45 minutes. It's unbelievable what comes out. It's very, very effective. There are several states in the country that do not allow you to use ozone in an occupied space. It really is not healthy for you. I don't suggest you use ozone. If you do use ozone, I would be asking why. Why are you doing that? I would be looking at the cause of that rather than treat the symptom of what's in the air. Okay. Okay, first subfloor is insulated. Can we live in the basement and first floor finished in the next 3 years? No. Can't do it. It doesn't matter that it's insulated. I went through this. Maybe I'll do it again if you need, but you have to have the floor above where you're occupying the space. That area above is going to be receiving the moisture that is created by living down there. Cooking, perspiring, cleaning, doing everything we do as human beings, and it's going to go up into the first floor, let's say. They're talking about a basement. Go up into the first floor, and it's going to be acting like an attic. So your basement is 72 degrees. Your first floor is going to be 40, 45, and you're going to hit dew point, you have to heat the occupied spaces. Within the envelope of the house, you have to treat that uniformly. And it doesn't matter whether you got 2 floors or 3 floors, you have to treat this entire, underneath the ceiling of the attic, you have to treat this entire ceiling as one single unit. So if you're going to go through a winter doing this, you'd have to go to your first floor, insulate the exterior walls, and put drywall up, and then heat the first floor. You can finish it, you can do the interior walls, you can do your piping, or whatever you want to do later down the road, but those exterior walls have to be protected from the moisture that's being created, and you have to heat it to keep the dew point down. Okay, subfloor insulated, first floor ceiling, no insulation. Yeah. That's going to cause you a problem, whoever this is. Okay, you have had experience working with some diagnosed CIRS, chronic inflammatory response syndrome. Do you know what the ERMI? Okay, let's talk about ERMI tests. ERMI is an acronym for what they did years ago was EPA funded the research of trying to determine the type of molds that are present and the quantity using DNA. So they put lots and lots of money into this program, had some great ideas about doing it, and halfway through, EPA discovered that it doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is you can identify about 35 types of mold through DNA. But what they're doing is they're taking the weight of a DNA strand and they're dividing that into the amount of DNA in the sample. That doesn't work. You can't take the weight and divide it and come up with a population. It's wildly inaccurate. So if you're going to do ERMI, all you're interested in is what kind of mold species or genera are present. You don't care about the amount, just what is there. I've never done an ERMI test because I go to so many conferences and these old folk in the back are throwing wads of paper and yodeling at people because they're presenting data in presentations using ERMI, and these guys are just, like, why are you doing this? Don't you know enough? It's 10 after 8. My daughter and husband purchased a house a few years ago, and the house has mold issue, and previous family, small children, had a lot of asthma-type illness. Found out builder put plastic between the drywall and the insulation. Oh, crap. Any suggestions besides ripping it out? Nope. Nope. I can't think of a single suggestion. Now, I'm going to tell you this. I want to tell you a story about why I'm really happy with the kind of work I do, because I really do feel like I help people. So Chris and I, we were down in this conference, and there were 4 doctors on stage. And they all do research and development in indoor air quality issues. And so this one guy gets up and says, I want you to know how important your work is to your community, because I study the increasing birth rate of autistic children. And way back then, it was about 1 out of every 127 was an autistic child. Now it's about 1 out of 85. It's over a full percent. My daughter is autistic. And so what he said was, it crosses, this ratio, this percentage crosses all geographic locations. It doesn't matter how much money you make. It doesn't matter what your race is or what your religion is. It doesn't matter. It is a very consistent number across the United States. And he said the only thing that we have found that is absolutely consistent is a mother that has asthma and her tendency to have an autistic child. My wife has asthma, dealt with it forever. So it really struck home with me because, this went through the crowd like wildfire, because everyone knows one of the leading causes of asthma in children is exposure to mold. So I just want you to take it really cautiously and seriously and, all that stuff. Be safe with your family, because we want those little girls to grow up healthy, not have asthma. Okay? All right. You can't do anything with that except take the walls down. I think you've got a hobby. How did you discover that? I would really like to know. How would you discover that you had plastic behind the walls? Were you remodeling? Is that the idea? I mean, that's all I can figure is somebody said, oh, honey, let's expand this wall here. So you did, and then you found plastic behind the drywall. You just don't do that. Okay, we live in a basement house. Should we put a vapor barrier between the cement and the linoleum on the floor? What's a basement house? Is that like a hobbit house? Like you're underground?
Well, that's just a roof on the block.
Oh.
And there's no,
Slab on grade, pretty much.
Slab on grade,
Concrete walls.
no ventilation, no, wow. There's a lot of things to think about on that one. Okay, would you put a vapor barrier between the cement and the linoleum on the floor? I would
yeah,
say,
there'd be ventilation on the roof.
huh, there is?
There'd be ventilation. It's just
Oh,
the same
okay.
roof as upstairs, but just,
Okay,
just be sitting on the block.
okay. I would say vapor barrier, absolutely. Yeah, I would go with a vapor barrier. And you could just paint the floor, you could put plastic down, but I would probably paint it 2 or 3 coats. And that's pretty good. Yeah, that's a good question. If we dry laundry in the basement, does it help us to run a fan? Yeah. And have the fan pointed outside. Don't have the fan pointed inside. That's like don't. Have the fan in the window pointed outside so you're evacuating. And if you have a door on the other side, you can crack it open, or a window, and so the airflow goes from over here through your laundry area and out. And that'll work. That'll work. Does moisture travel through vinyl floor? No. No, it doesn't. The vinyl flooring is impermeable. Now, there is staining that can come through a vinyl floor. There's a lot of literature where you could actually see a red staining coming through the bottom side, but that's not water. That's a stain. Your thoughts on spray foam insulation in vaulted ceilings? I think I covered that. I hope I covered that. Yeah, don't do that. Can air ducts be cleaned by use of fogger by yourselves? Don't ever use a fogger. Don't use a fogger. I don't know what you would use a fogger for. Fogging, where fogging comes from, is the water damage restoration industry when you had sewage back up on a floor and they fog an enzyme, and this enzyme hits the E. coli that's in the sewage and it chews it up and it becomes safe to clean up. You don't want to be around E. coli. So that's where fogging came from. And then they started using this technique of going from a liquid to a mist, and they've tried using it in a wide variety of applications. One is in mold contamination. Don't ever do it. So can air ducts be cleaned by use of a fogger by yourselves? No, I would hire a company to clean your air ducts. And if it's flex duct, forget it. You've got to replace it. You can't clean flex duct. You got to replace it. But I'm going to tell you this. I wonder if the air ducts are under pressure of air. I don't know how the air ducts are being used. But if air's flowing through them, put a filter on the supply end. Because there's a lot of literature where you have a particle counter, air's coming out, then you clean the air and you use a particle counter, and it's 100 times higher. So you want to put some kind of a little pad over that before you clean it. But I don't think I'd ever use a fogger. Ooh, my, little print. If a person has seriously affected physically by mycotoxins, what do you recommend to do? Work with a doctor or try something naturally? How long can a person be affected or battle with health issues? 6 months, 5 years? Okay, first part. If a person is seriously affected physically by mycotoxins, I'd make a beeline to a doctor. No ifs, ands, buts, no stopping. Go to a doctor. I'm not going to go through the horror stories of the people that I've worked with, but I can just tell you that they have methods of working with folks that really, really, really do work. Then how long does a person be affected or battle with health issues? I'm not going to say. Yeah, it's really hard to tell. I mean, I'm listening. I belong to about a group of about 18 other people that are like top dogs in the country, and we banter forth with emails to each other, and it's really a pleasure to be part of that group. And this one gentleman, Jeff May, I just love this guy, and he was telling me about one of his clients that literally had to be sequestered in an almost sterile environment because of his permanent health conditions that have been developed by exposure to mold growth. So it's a hard thing to say. I can't answer the question. Oh, gosh. Okay, my drywall was removed, up to 2 feet of insulation removed. Have I seen that? The outside wall is rotted and moldy, but has been treated. It is on a cement slab. Because of the legal process, what does that mean? The legal process, I still have not put on drywall. The legal process. We are scared of the water coming in again, but after hearing this, how can I keep safe without drywall this winter? I would say talk to me later. Why don't you get more personal with me and talk to me later? Maybe I've got some ideas for you. I'm not gonna, that is multi-layered. The answer to this has several layers to it. So please find me or call me. You can call me if you're busy. Is proper insulation important? What is proper? Oh, proper window installation important. Oh my gosh, that's a whole subculture of people who put in windows. Oh, heck yeah. Do you want to answer what's proper installation of a window? I don't do it. I don't install windows. You do. No? No? Okay. Okay, what is proper? I don't install windows. I'm not a builder. I just complain when it's done wrong. Captain woulda, coulda, shoulda. Can black mold be smelled? Yes, if it's growing. Yeah, it produces a volatile organic compound, just like like cladosporium or alternaria or stachybotrys or any of that stuff. And I assume you're talking about black mold being stachybotrys. There's an odor produced. Okay, how do I clean mold on unpainted cement blocks in a basement? Soap and water, scrub brush. I would start off, and I'm assuming it's not a big area. I'm assuming this is not a big area. I mean, you can go up to maybe a 4x8 sheet of plywood kind of size. Beyond that, I really want you to be careful about what you're doing. I've run into a couple of families recently where I walk in and here's a 15-foot wide room and it's 20 feet back, and this is where they do their laundry, and they've not done a good job. And I'm looking at the fur. I'm serious fur on the floor joists. Of course, somebody did air sampling, and I'm going, you can't do this yourself. I'm sorry. I keep my fingers out of people's wallets best I can. I don't try to encourage you to hire me, but there's just some times when you have to hire somebody who has better equipment and knows how to do it and has the chemicals, and it's just safer for your home. I want you to think about safety of your home. That's all. So how do I clean mold on unpainted cement blocks? I would start off, respirator, safety glass, rubber gloves, and I would get down with a soapy cloth, wet technique, soapy cloth, rag, wipe it down, and then take a scrub brush, not wire, but bristle, and scrub it down, and then take a rag, and then wipe it off again, and then wipe it off 3 times. Don't do it once or twice. Wipe those walls down 3 times. You'll be surprised what you get at the end. And if there's discoloration at the end, you don't care. Because when I talked earlier about root systems and anchors and all that, you're going to take off the top branching structures, but the anchor on the bottom is going to stay, and that's the color, and you're not going to get rid of it. So, or if it doesn't all go away, don't worry about it. Just let it dry and then paint over it. But be aware it's going to come back unless you deal with the water issue. Okay, how warm should a vacant house be during the winter on a cement slab? Ooh, ouch, ouch. 1 story, 60% humidity. I would say don't let it go below 67, 68, somewhere in there.
That's a good one.
Why are there so many different opinions on mold in the Amish community? Where's my soapbox? That's why we're here tonight. And I'm serious. This is why we are here tonight. Because I'm going behind people and they're saying such absurd, incorrect things that it just irritates me. And so I was contacted by Melvin, some other guys. There were two different groups that said, Bob, we got to do this again because there's so much fear, so much misinformation. If everybody had the same technical knowledge and training, we would all be saying the same thing. But we don't. Now, I have a library of books. I get up about 5:30 every morning and I read 10 pages out of one of my books. I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but over a month I've read 300 pages. Over a year I've read 3,500 pages. That's a lot. And that's what you have to do. It's not the fast rabbit. It's a slow little turtle that, and that's how you learn. You invest in yourself. You go to conferences. If I hadn't joined the Indoor Air Quality Association and gone to conferences every year, I would not be in business today because I've learned so much. Chris and I go to these conferences. We come back and say, we're going to change this, and we're going to change this, and we're going to change this in our business because we hear what other people are doing. It's great. I wish I could fix that.
The last one.
Last one. Should a gas fridge and freezer be vented? I'm assuming they don't normally vent them at all, do they? They don't. Huh? It sure would be sweeter if they were vented, but if they're not vented, they're not made to be vented. I mean, what are you going to do? Put it outside? No. I guess I don't have a good answer for you. Call the manufacturer and say, I want a vented freezer. Okay, guys. Based on I know you don't like to raise your hand, but if there are any other residual questions, please yodel at me if you want to come up to me after this is over and you want to talk to me, or if you want to grab one of my business cards and call me at the office. I'm real busy. But I always try to answer my phone calls. Okay? Thanks again for coming. Thanks, Melvin, for inviting me. And have a nice evening, guys.